Hello everyone, I am Shruti Gangar and the topic of today's video is trade and commerce. In this video I will focus on the trade and commerce in ancient India, and then I will trace the trade and commerce of textile in India from the ancient to the contemporary age. So India has always been a leading nation with prized commodities to offer such as spices, jewels, perfumes, medicinal drugs, fine textiles, etc. There is evidence that maritime trade continued on a major scale in the Vedic, Mauryan, Krishna, and Gupta periods, and also in the subsequent periods of South Indian dynasties like Pallavas, Chalukyas, and Cholas. May our ship embark to all quarters of the earth is mentioned as the motto of the Rigvedic seafarers. Similarly, Buddhist literature including Jatak stories are also replete with accounts of sea voyages, shipwrecks and missionaries going overseas. There were feeder land routes for bringing goods from the point of their production to the points of export, that is seaports and vice versa. The feeder land routes acted as supporting collection as well as distribution channels during trade. Till about the beginning of the 18th century, many countries obtained its supplies of fine cotton and silk, spices, indigo, sugar, precious stones, and many curious work of art from India in exchange of gold and silver to a large extent. This traditional prosperity of India began to vanish only at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in the West. The alluvial plains of the Indus and the Ganga were the most productive regions of India and were thus suitable for the development of trade, agriculture and industry. The river systems of the Indo-Gangetic plains was the real source of prosperity, which not only helped in developing productivity but also provided a system of water routes. Many towns and cities flourished on the banks of the Indo-Gangetic rivers, which served the purpose of trade emporiums. So there are various reasons why India was number one country in trade, commerce and manufacturing activities. The mercantile community of India was very enterprising and was known for their entrepreneurship, trustworthiness and resilience. Indian goods were known for their excellence. The skilled artisans of India manufactured variety of goods which people in other parts of the world could not find elsewhere. With the knowledge of the sea routes, monsoon winds and other navigational aspects, people were able to sell to distant corners of the earth with their goods. Fairs were an important means for commercial activities and were held in every part of the country. Huge number of people assembled at these fairs for the purpose of exchanging merchandise as well as discussing religious and national topics. To facilitate trade and commerce, royal roads were constructed all over the country from east to west and from north to south. The river Ganga and its tributary were used for carrying goods. India carried extensive trade with China, Ceylon, Java and Sumatra through the port of Tamraplipti in Bengal. The traditional trading class in India was mostly the Vaishyas. Later we find this profession being followed by Parsis, Baniyas and Marwaris in the Bombay Presidency, the Lingayats in Karnataka region, Chettis and Komatis in the Madras Presidency, Khatris in Punjab, etc. In the Neolithic age, people were settled and had acute needs of acquiring new types of stones. Thus they had to go out in search of it, and therefore the tracks became defined and perhaps a system of water transport became popular for the people. In this age, the tool making industry was sufficiently specialized and therefore some sort of exchange would have been introduced between the manufacturers of tools and their users. This would have given birth to the barter system, and thus a regular trade between the factory sites and the consumers would have begun. With the urbanization of the Indus culture, trade became vitally connected with the economic life of the society. Trade during this time made considerable progress, and much of the cultural contact of the people in the Indus Valley civilization with others seemed to be the result of this commerce. The traders also established contacts with foreign lands, particularly Mesopotamia, where these goods were in demand. The Rig Veda contains several references to sea voyages undertaken for commercial and other purposes. When urban culture flourished in cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, India had established trade relations with Sumer, Egypt and Crete. Lothal in Gujarat was one of the biggest port towns of that period. In the Old Testament, we have reference to trade between India and the Syrian coast dating back to 1400 BC from 1400 BC. From the 1st century AD, commodities greatly in demand in the Roman world from India were spices and perfumes, silks, muslins and cotton. All these commodities were paid for in gold and silver by the Roman traders. There was a considerable number of foreign residents in Patliputra, and they were in all probability traders. Sweet fine wines, glass vessels, costly vessels of silver, singing boys and beautiful maidens for the harem, and choicest ointment were some of the articles imported in India, while India exported fine silks, muslin, spices, perfumes, medicinal herbs, indigo, sandalwood, pearls, ivory, iron, steel, etc. The Arthashastra of Kautilya refers to the fact that the state had enacted rules and regulations on trade movement, including appointment of a superintendent of shipping to control waterborne trade, a Mudradhyaksh, who is a superintendent of travel documents, to oversee trade, and a superintendent of trade and customs for overall regulation of trade, including the collection of duties on commodities. While the Mauryans carried on their trade mainly with the east through the Kalinga ports, the Guptas not only increased their eastern trade effectively but opened up the western seaborne trade, and this led to the unprecedented economic prosperity. In the Malabar coast of Kottayam and Murizis were the main ports through which brisk trade was carried with the eastern archipelago and China. The Arabs used to visit the west coast to purchase goods like teak, perfumes, black salt, spices, indigo, textiles, muslin, etc., and Indian commodities were very popular in Arabian countries. From the earliest times, the products of Tamil Nadu appeared to have attracted the merchants of distant lands. The names Kapim and Tukim, as found in the Hebrew Bible for apes and peacocks, are the same as those still used in Tamil, that is Kavi and Tokai. The Greek names for rice, which is Oryza, ginger, Zinziber, and cinnamon, Carpion, are almost identical with their Tamil names Iris, Inchiver, and Karua, all which clearly indicate that Greek merchants conveyed these articles and their names to the Europeans from Tamil Nadu. It was the Greek merchants from Egypt who brought wine, brass, lead, glass, etc. for sale, and Murizis and Vaikaris, and purchased from these ports pepper, betel, ivory, pearls, and fine muslin. The Cholas gave tremendous impetus to foreign trade. The Chola rulers sent trading missions to China. Indian products like cotton fabric, spices, jewels, ivory, rhinoceros horn, precious stones, and aromatic products were in great demand in China, and its import caused considerable drainage of Chinese currency. During the rule of Vijayanagar, the ports on the east and west coast were humming with trade. Spices, iron ore, coconuts, jaggery, diamonds, limestones, rice, and textiles were exported on a large scale. Horses from Persia, armaments from Europe, and other kinds of goods like copper, coral, mercury were imported. Marco Polo remarks that the greater part of revenue of the kingdom in India is employed in obtaining horses from foreign countries. Through ages, India occupied a unique position in the commercial world as the main supplier of the world's luxuries and had a favorable balance of trade. So now we will talk about the trade routes. So trade routes are the veins of the economic life of a country, and from the earliest times they have determined the route of the progress and broken the isolation of the regional economy. In ancient India, trade routes were known as Vanik Patha, which included land as well as water routes. All these routes had commercial significance in addition to military and administrative importance, as they were connected with the important commercial centers. Uh, commercial centers. The general term to denote the water routes was Varipat or Jalpat. Kautilya classified the water routes in three groups. First was the coastal routes, the second was the routes going through mid-ocean, and the third are the river routes. By 2500 BC, the people of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro developed an effective system of water transport. This development of the means of water communication probably led to the emergence of an urban civilization in the Indus Valley. While the river routes were easier and more dependable for the traders of the Indus Valley civilization, the use of land routes cannot be ruled out. When the urban influence of Mohenjo-daro and Harappan cities began to dominate the peasant communities of Baluchistan, the contact and trade between them became intensive. The trade relations between the cities of the Indus Valley civilizations and the cities of Elam and Sumer developed through water routes. The distribution of Indus commodities was not confined to the markets of Sumer and Elam, but directly or indirectly reached the cities of Anatolia, Crete, Greece, and the markets of Egypt. We also noticed the routes between India and Bactria. So some of the cities of historic times which controlled the trade between India and the West were Bactria, Merv, Ekban, Seleucia, and etc. Bactria was the clearing house for Indian trade and served as an important emporium not only for Indian goods but also of goods brought from countries like China, Siberia, and Iran. We can also notice various routes between India and the West. The economic and cultural relation of India with Syria was quite intimate. Much of the industrial development of Syria was based on the Indian supplies of raw material. There was a route along which Indian goods were sent to Russia and to other Western countries along the river Oxus. There were some routes around the Caspian Sea which went to the Black Sea ports. Barbaricum, a port on the mouth of the river Sindh, was the most important emporium for the exchange of commodities of India, Tibet, Persia, and China. Bands of traders from India regularly went to Babylon. The Baberu Jatak informs us that the Indian merchants periodically voyaged from India to Babylon along the coast of the Persian Gulf. Alexandria was an important emporium of Indian goods from where there was a direct route for Puteoli, a famous port of Rome. So far we saw the extension of maritime contacts of the Indian in the West. More extensive and vigorous contacts of India were with the East. Due to the economic as well as cultural reasons, they developed routes with the Far East, and most of the countries now known as the Far East were approached by Indians in search of gold. The land in the east and the southeast of India became aptly named as Suvarna Bhumi, the El Dorado of Indian traders. Some Jatak stories refer to traders and adventurers who undertook the voyage to Suvarnabhumi for wealth and profit. The oldest route between India and China was probably to Assam, Upper Burma, and Yunnan. Long before the 2nd century BC, Chinese cotton and bamboo were carried through this route from China to Bactria via India. So there were various difficulties of the trade routes, and some of them included insecurity, thieves, wild animals, rough terrain, rough water conditions, and natural calamities such as drought or famine. So various mediums of exchanges could be noticed for the exchange of goods. The antiquity of barter as a mode of sale can be traced to the time when man in India for the first time acquired so much technical skill, particularly in the manufacture of some implements, that he could produce surplus. In early economic society, the scope of such mutual exchange by barter was very limited, but the scope of barter increased with the rise in the volume of technical production. The Jataks also refer to several instances of barter. Sometimes bigger transactions were also made through barter. The Atharva Ved also proves the practice of barter in that age. So during the Vedic age, there appears to have existed a system of non-metallic money such as cows or rice for the exchange of goods. Nisak and Hiranyapinda were the two types of metallic money prevalent in Vedic India. Some scholars believe that they were not coins but merely ornaments. D.R. Bhandarkar opines that during the Vedic age, the Niska was the name of a coin in the country. He accepted the term Rupa or Viswarupa as technical words denoting the symbol or figure on a coin. However, in the Arthashastra, the word Rupa comes in a different sense. Kautilya mentions Rupadhyaksh as the examiner of coins, whose duty was to regulate currency both as the medium of exchange and as a legal tender admissible into the treasury. There was another officer, Lakshanadhyaksh, who was the mint master and whose duty was to examine the symbol or stamps of the coins. Thus, this shows that while the term rupa meant the coin, the term lakshana meant the symbol or stamp of a coin. One of the reasons for promoting corporate activities in economic life was the localization of trade and industry in the post-Vedic period. From some early Buddhist sources and from Jataks, we get information about the localized guilds of the industrialists and traders. By the 6th century BC, there was a great rise in the volume of trade in India. Increased trade needed an organized and planned production and quick distribution. This was possible only through an efficient system of financing. Kings in ancient India and the government had taken upon themselves the duty to promise trade by providing capital to help in production and also to safeguard the routes to enable quick distribution. There arose a class of Sethis who controlled the financing of trade on individuals as well as on a partnership basis. Such Sethis contributed to businesses by money and also with the commodities. They made investments either to the agents or to the individual traders. The partnerships and guilds were mainly constituted by wholesale dealers, the individual traders conducting retail trade for their commodities either on wholesale dealers or on their own small scale production. Generally, there was a contractual relationship between the wholesale dealer and the retail trader, and the basis of the contract was perhaps a commission or a share in profit. The middleman's brokerage was perhaps fixed, and that was regularly put in the account of the agent, irrespective of the profit of the wholesale dealer. Much of the retail trade was carried on by hawkers and shopkeepers who not only distributed the commodities of wholesale dealers as independent traders but also sold the commodities which they either produced or purchased directly from other producers. So now we will look at the trade and commerce of textile in India. And textiles have consistently been one of the key items of Indian trade ever since the Harappan period. It can be reasonably ascertained that cotton, woolen, and silk textiles have consistently remained popular articles of trade throughout the ancient period. It is equally true for the domestic as well as for the international trade. India was an important and integral part of the international Silk Route, which was a historic trade process for a pretty long time, stretching from the 2nd century BC to the 14th century CE. Textile trade in ancient India. So, from the earliest times, Indian trade flourished in all forms, be it limited internal or domestic, or long distance external trade, be it through land or water. The Harappans have been well recognized as accomplished seafarers, as evidenced by the depiction of boats on seals or amulets. There are references to clothes along with some other items like medicinal plants, incense, fragrance materials, etc., were regularly sent to Mesopotamia from the eastern countries of Mehlua, which was the Sumerian name for the Indus Valley civilization. These items continued to be in trade in the subsequent periods also. Atharva Ved indicates that a kind of woolen cloth called dursha formed the article of trade. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a manual written by a Greek for the mariners trading between Red Sea and Bay of Bengal, also refers to trading of clothes from India. This book talks about the very fine quality muslins as an item of export. With the knowledge of southwesterly monsoon winds having an annual cycle of fixed direction and time becoming known in Asia. In the 1st century CE, India's trade with Roman world became brisk and many seaports developed on the western coast of Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka and Kerala, along with many on the eastern coast of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa and West Bengal as well. These ports, along with their feeder channels, created a network of trade routes at the turn of the Christian era and facilitated a brisk movement of diversified merchandise at a volume never witnessed before in the inland or the overseas trade. Textile was a significant component of this trade. The Uttar Path or the northern land routes and Dakshin Path or the southern land routes, together constituting the grand route of India, became the arterial trade routes, along with their feeder channels for silk trade, especially during the Kushana period, which connected China, Southeast Asia, and the European countries. So now we talk about the trade in the medieval India. The oldest and the most diversified sea route from the last 2 millennia is the Indian Ocean. It is known to have been the center of intense commercial activity. India in the medieval times was deemed to be the largest and most competitive producer of textiles. Thus, India was at the center of the Indian Ocean trade in textiles for a long period of time. Internationally, India was prominently trading with Southwest Asia and the Mediterranean via the Arabian Sea and with the Southeast Asia via the Bay of Bengal. The well-known centers of trade during the medieval period were Surat, Bengal and Masulipatam. Indian textiles such as cotton, muslin and silk became prestigious items all around the Indian Ocean. The port of Surat connected India to the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Apart from Surat, India was trading from the eastern coast as well, where the main ports were Masulipatam and Bengal. The specialization of the Coromandel coast was chains. It was produced in the Golconda region and was famous worldwide as the chains of Masulipatam. Chintz fabric was also held in high regard among the Mughals and the Europeans. This textile also exported to France and England. It was also transported to Persia as bedspreads and lining material. In the early 16th century, the region of Gujarat was a leading center for trade. The chief items of trade from this region were cotton and silk. Patka was also traded. The port of Surat became a place for exchange for goods where merchandise was being passed through places like central India, the Deccan, Kashmir, and Lahore. As the textile trade grew, some of the influence of Indian textile techniques was focused on foreign textiles. Moreover, the textiles were further assimilated according to the local culture and thereafter were given indigenous meaning. For example, in Indonesia, the apparels were influenced by Indian standards in terms of technique of production, designs, and most importantly, the material. By the second half of the 16th century, Bengal was a major exporting region of India. Muslin was an important item that was loved both within and outside India. It was considered a superior textile because it was very fine and light. The muslin of Dhaka was especially famous. Vasco da Gama talked about a certain type of textile called estraventas, which was described as a very thin type of cloth, which must esteemed among the ladies, which must be a reference to muslin. At this time, the Bengal muslin was being traded to Thailand and China and the Middle East. Muslin was highly favored by the Ottomans for turbans. This textile was commercialized further by Portuguese traders from Dhaka and Sripur. Maritime trade was taken to be high level when the English East India Company and the Dutch East India Company entered into Asiatic trade. The two major textiles of these two regions were indigo and cotton. The chart shows the amount of goods that were exported from Gujarat and the Coromandel port through the Dutch East India Company. Sakrej indigo, Jambusar indigo, and Biana indigo textiles were in high demand. In the late 16th century, indigo was being exported from Sakrej and Jambusar from Gujarat and Coromandel. The demand for indigo declined by the end of the 17th century. The arrival of Vasco da Gama at Calicut in the late 15th century paved the way for trade between India and Europe. This Portuguese sailor discovered a new sea route to India from Europe via the Cape of Good Hope. The Portuguese, Dutch, French, and the British consequently visited and established trading factories across the subcontinent from the early 16th century onwards. The European traders were captivated by the abundance of silk and cotton produced here. The British East India Company was founded in 1600 for trade with the South and the Southeast Asian nations. They primarily traded in spices, cotton, and silk. Throughout the 17th century, the export of cotton goods expanded very fast. The port of Surat on Gujarat coast connected India to the Gulf and the Red Sea ports, while Masulipatam on the Coromandel coast and Hooghly in Bengal had trade routes with Java, Sumatra, and Penang. Printed cotton textiles imported from India became popular in England and other European countries from the 1680s. Indian clothes were loved for their elegant floral designs, fine texture, and reasonable cost. Rich people of England, including the Queen herself, wore clothes of the Indian fabric. The increasing popularity of Indian textiles led to a protest against its import by the local wool and silk makers of England during the early 18th century. In 1721, the British government introduced an act to ban the use of chintz in England. This act came to be known as the Calico Act. The word chintz refers to printed cotton textiles. It is derived from the Hindi word chit, a cloth with small and colorful flowery design. The English producers wanted a secure market within the country by preventing an import of Indian finished products. During the 1730s, the first textile industry came up in England. Indian designs were copied and reproduced there on white muslin imported from India. As a consequence, it gave a death blow to the highly valued Indian fabrics. The biggest strike from the British was the defeat of the Nawab of Bengal Siraj-ud-Daulah in the Battle of Plassey in 1757. It was a demonstration of the British military strength and their capacity to monopolize Indian trade. The textile export network controlled by the Indian merchants started to deteriorate following this battle. This resulted in a decline of the old ports of Surat and Hooghly through which the local merchants used to operate their exports. In the last years of the 17th century, the gross value of trade that passed through the port of Surat was Rs 16 million. By the 1740s, it fell to 3 million rupees. While the old ports of Surat and Hooghly dried up, Bombay and Calcutta started to grow. It was a vivid indicator of colonial power in India. The European companies started to control the trade through these new ports from the second half of the 18th century. The exceptional developments of cotton industries in Britain post-industrial revolution gradually affected the textile producers in India. Indian textiles had to compete with the British textiles in the European and American markets. Exporting textiles from here also became troublesome since high duties were imposed on Indian textiles imported to Britain. It resulted in a great deterioration of the Indian textile trade. The Indian mills received a great domestic market during the World War I. It also supplied several war equipments including jute bags, leather boots and army uniforms. India developed trade with Persia, Turkey, Africa and Ceylon during this period. As a consequence, India's textile industry and trade started to cover a wider market. The partition in India resulted into another blow to the industry as the raw material producing regions and the areas which had factories which split by the new industrial borders. It fell upon the new Indian government to take extra care in order to reinforce the textile industry along with the others. The Industrial Policy Statement, introduced in 1948, identified 18 industries of national interest. The textile industry was one of those, and in 1951 it was covered by the Industries Development and Regulation Act, which placed the textile industry under government protection through licensing of raw materials and imports. India is the largest producer of cotton and jute and the second largest producer of silk in the world. Additionally, it is only the only country producing 5 varieties of silk: mulberry, eri, muga, tropical tussar and temperate tussar. It is the second largest exporter of textiles and has a 5% share in the global trade of textiles and apparel. This graph compares the import and export of textiles in US dollars to and from India in the last 5 financial years. As is clear from the diagram, the exports of Indian textile have been consistently more than its imports. Being the largest producer of jute in the world, India's export in jute has also been significant. The major areas to which jute from India is exported are the European Union, the United States, Ghana, Saudi Arabia and Nepal. Despite various trade regulations and protective restrictions on the international trade imposed by other countries in the past, over time India has managed to stand out as an important player in the global market of textiles and claim a prominent share in the textile trade. Thank you for your attention.